as I said, the presentation will be, well, it will last for an hour. In the end, we will have some time for questions, and we could also take a closer look to the stage. Chris just left, but my colleague Chris and Gautam is back now. We will do this together. This is a research project that's called Fading Light, crossover from candlelight to LED. And my background is I'm teaching technical theatre here at school, and I've been interested. I'm a lighting designer, and I have been interested in the historical evolution of the lighting on the stage. And as you might know, it has been a big changeover from candlelight. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about it, but it's a real interesting journey the light has been on since we started to have indoor performance. Chris, your background?
Yeah. Well, I'm Chris van Gutem. I'm teaching in Brussels at the Ritz School of Arts, which is part of the Erasmus University of Brussels, and I'm working as a researcher for the Expertise Center of Technical Theatre, which is basically a gathering of people researching together all different types of things within the field of technical theatre, going from competence management to very technical things to very artistic things. That's basically it.
So, now we're going to take you on a journey. So we start from the beginning. I leave in the room. No, I don't. I'm going to close the door. And Chris, do you find the fader?
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, we have still a little bit light in the room. But this is a situation that not so many people are used to anymore. In the history, this has been nearly 50% of every man's lifetime. Half of a day is in daylight, and the rest is in the night. So therefore, well, unfortunately this is glowing, so we can't put it totally in dark. But this is a way to start to express the problem, or maybe the possibilities we have with using light for special purposes. And this is a way to do it. This candle should rest for an hour, because that's the burning time of it. So this will be our, now I forget the word, timglas.
Hourglass.
Time glass?
Hourglass.
Hourglass, good. So this will be probably an hourglass. Chris, please, you could take up the light again. And I hand it over to you to have the first slides.
Okay. Good. Before we really start, we put together some statements about what we discovered in this whole research. And one important element is that we figured out the history of lighting is not a technical history, but it's a history about taking control over all the different parameters of light, taking control over intensity, taking control over color, taking control over focus. And we will see that in this whole history, the real changes are changes in control. Not so much in better lighting equipment and so on, but in taking control over it. An important element is that the lighting only exists in relation to its environment. If there is nothing to light, you don't see the light. The light only exists when you look at something, if you light something. Which is quite important because it also gives you the relationship to the sets, to the costumes, to the wigs, to the actors. This environment is connected to it, so you can't research the lighting on its own. except if you're a physicist, but that's not our strong point. And the second thing, and Anders already mentioned that, is it's also related to the perception of people. In the sense that if you're used to live with one candle a week, which happened in the Middle Ages, but even in the 30s in the States, some people lived with one candle a week. That means that your perception of light and the minimum light you need to be able to work is completely different than what we have now. Our perception is rather deformed because we have so much light that we hardly can imagine darkness anymore. And even if there is light, we still think it is dark. So I think that's another important element. For me, one of the most fascinating things we found in our research is we found nests. Nests in the sense that different people in a region at one moment, or in a certain environment at one moment, are together by hazard, and they start influencing each other. They start, one starts something and another starts another experiment, and things happen. And you see completely new ideas that are appearing. But the strange thing is that in a lot of cases, after that, it disappears completely. You have these very new ideas, they disappear again, and they only come back later in history. So you have this innovation where people try to create something completely new with complete new aspect, but they're not accepted in the first place into the professional society. And it's only later on that people look back to them and say, oh, this is a good idea. In a lot of cases also because they experiment with things where technology is not ready to do it. And then the big question is it the technology following these ideas or the ideas going in front of the technology? That's always a difficult one. And that also brings me to the point, which is one of my fascinating things, is that every technology needs a playground. And the simplest example is moving lights. The first show with moving lights, you entered the room and they were moving the whole time, and you've seen the whole aspects of what a moving light could do, and you left the room and they were still moving. That ends up 10 years later with a performance lit only by moving lights, and they're not moving at all, except for the last minute in the opera when the last person dies. All the moving lights come together and fade out. And we need this play garden, we need this all moving around and stuff like that to be able to discover a language for light. And with this language, once we manage this, then we really can talk. In the beginning it's just playing around, but this playing around is essential for what we're doing. We're going to try to take you very quickly over 2,000 years of history, a little bit more, based on the different light sources. And the first light source is quite simple. It's natural light, sunlight, we'll know Greeks, Romans and so on. But even in Shakespeare time, when they played inside, they opened and closed the windows and they worked partly with daylight. And then we go to the Vikings, and that is, he looks a lot more like a Viking than I do.
Well, I might not look like a Viking, but I can talk about it. The problem is that to find evidence or real sources for how they lit or used light in the time of the Vikings is very hard to find. We have found one example, is the top one, the one to the right. And that is one finding from Birka. And they keep record of every findings they have where it was found. And it says oil lamp ? So they don't even know if it's a kind of oil lamp, this one. And when we try to read or find texts about what kind of fuel did they use, was it an oil lamp or was it something else? Because the normal answer to that question is that they used from the very beginning animal fat to use. For example, they put animal fat in shells and a small wick. And this is not a shell, as you can see, it's another type of container. And that type of vessel or container. That one, we had an idea to actually build this one because it's just 5 centimeters high and a little bit, well, the size of that. So I bought clay, but unfortunately we didn't have time until this presentation to do it. But that will be one of our future tests if this is really working. The other one you have to talk a little bit about.
Yeah. The thing is, if you work with fat, it's kind of a more or less pasty, solid material. But the moment you put the wick in it, it becomes fluid. So you can't make a candle out of it. The interesting thing is we found what they said was a candle somewhere in a Czech castle somewhere, in an old Baroque theatre. And basically it's the same technique. In the way you put kind of a greasy, sticky product in it, you put a wick in it, and it will become fluid once burnt. So that's one element if you go to really fat. If you go a step further, and this is why my wife and kids love my research, we made tallow candles. And tallow is basically you take a cow and you take the fat out of the cow and you boil it so all the bad parts are out of it, and you get kind of a nice strong white fat which is thick enough to make candles out of it. And we made, you can buy it. We made one little one here. I can.
You want it to be lit?
Yeah, and you can show it around. It's a little bit greasy, but it's not dangerous. So this is the first way to make candles, the oldest way that we find. And what you see is that this works, but it's a little bit on the limit. Even if you have the right fat, it's very difficult to make the candles because the boiling temperature is
very low.
It's very low. So if you pour it over, it melts again. So it really needs a lot of skills to be able to do that.
And to give you the right impression of, you see the kitchen pot there, but you don't feel the smell because the one sends around is quite good. I'm going to send around a small, it says hjortronsylt. Don't take it for a hjortronsylt because this is tallow. And I want you to at least sniff on it a little bit because you get the impression of how it, well, not taste, but how it, the smell of it.
One of the problems we had with this tallow candle is if you look at all the literature, it all says it smells horribly and it smokes and whatever. And we made these candles and they were quite okay. And we've been looking into what the problem would be, and probably it's because the quality we have now, the purity we can have, that's on one end, and on the other hand, the quality of the wicks is way better than in time. And it's the impurity, in fact, that makes all the smelling and smoking.
I can say a little bit more about that. You know, if you want to buy tallow today, in Sweden it's quite hard because we are using, no one likes fat on their meat in Sweden, so therefore you can't buy anything with fat on it. But they have cut it out and sell it especially around Christmas because you could put this in the tree, hanging in the tree for the birds. The birds like it, so they sell it. It's called talg then. And that's the only way to get it. But you could tell a little bit about how you bought it in Brussels.
Yeah, well, I'm teaching in Molenbeek. You probably know this little village in part of Brussels. This is where all the terrorists come from. That's where our school is. And I found a butcher that was, because normally they're not wanting to sell this because all kind of health and safety regulations, but I found one, I explained what I needed to do. And in that sense, I could really buy it, but they cut it so clean that there was no meat at all. I can imagine if you would do that in the Middle Ages, there was still leftovers of meat and stuff like that, which would help in making it more smelly. So I think that's the next step we have to try, is to make it more smelly. But
a colleague to me today reminded, Mira who's sitting up there, reminded me about an sculpture artist who actually worked in fat with the sculpture, and the sculpture still remains in Berlin. and it has been on now for exposition for around 50 years, 60, 70 years, something like that, and it smells awful. And I think that will be the same for that for this situation.
And then we go to wax candles.
Okay. And wax candles. Most of you know them a little bit better. Some like the smell of them. You could buy these. It's very easy to, in Panduro, buy the wax candles or the wax, and then you could make your own wax candles. It's quite nice, small Christmas activity you could do. I'm going to send this around. You can smell that also, and maybe you find it. The smell is better than the tallow one. These wax candles, or beeswax, that was one thing the archaeological said about the Viking, that they used beeswax. But if you start to count about how many light you need every night, and even if the population during that time was not so big, you still need at least one candle or one vessel for every family. So the amount of beeswax you need for just use for light, that will be too much actually. So that's a type of findings that we really want to question when we have.
And what's more, if you use beeswax, it means the next year your bees hardly will produce any honey. So you would only use beeswax from nests that were left behind. So the chance that you have that in combination with the temperature, and it's quite unlikely, I would think.
And I think actually some other sources says that the Vikings, they used they hunted whales, and out of the whales they got the tallow, and a whale, well, it's large, you could get a lot of tallow out of just one whale. So that's another way to do it actually.
So the next big step is that the first big invention is how to make vegetable oil. This fat is kind of a natural product that you just take out of the nature and you can use it basically as it is. But the next big step is that we are able to produce vegetable oil in the sense we take olives, for example, and we press them and we create oil, which makes it possible to create a new type of lamp. Quite important is that if we talk about oil lamps, in a lot of cases people mean petrol lamps, or lamps with lamp oil, which is basically a petrol-based product. A real oil lamp is the wick only can take up the oil 6-7 millimeters, not more than that. So that means that the wick literally has to lay into the oil, and the oil has to stay on a level. So a lamp like that would mean almost permanent filling, because otherwise, so it would be lasting very short in time. That would be the first.
Yes, okay. Do you want me to, should we ignite the wraps, the olive oil? Or
we'll get to that when we get to the...
Take that later.
Okay.
To the left, to the right there, you see a very special container for, actually it's a lamp holder, and it's from the Roman time. Last summer, I visited Knossos in Crete, and they have a very famous museum. And I was on guided tour, and the guide just said, "We take the bottom floor, it is enough, we don't have time for the upper floor." And I asked, "What is on the upper floor?" "Well, it's just Roman stuff." And we were already in this project, and I said, "Well, I'm going to have a quick walk there." And I was literally running up there around. But then I stopped in front of this, because that's the first time I've seen that you have a light source with multi-wicks. And you normally could see 4 wicks, but this is 50 wicks. So this is the other one I want to build with the clay I bought. And this will be, I think this will be quite interesting impression when if we could build it and put light on it, or actually put it on fire.
Good. And then we get to our first nest. And that's where Sabatini said that we're really Furtenbach, all in the same region, between La Marche and Rome, start to experiment with a lot of stuff. And one of the elements you see is that in origin, theaters had what they call the heaven, a closed ceiling, which was painted. And you see that Sabatini says, yes, but if you really need to do something there, you could make it in these different slides. You could open it a little bit, and in between you could kind of do stuff, lower stuff or whatever. And then Furtenbach goes a step further and said, well, you can turn them a little bit further, and then you can put little lights behind. The lights, because a light based on a flame never lights really down. So the lights he put there was to lit the ceiling, the drawings on the ceiling, and not really on the actor. But you see, starting from a heavens, bit by bit, we get into what we know now, which is basically borders with light in between that comes down. So that is one element, and you start to see that because theater goes inside, and you start to get wings, and changing wings and all kind of different things, you start to see that you have footlights, side lights from both sides, mainly to light the sets, because in most cases they're not strong enough to light to the middle. Chandeliers in the house, but no top light, which means that the actors have to stay rather in the front. And they start experimenting. And we can show that, I think, there with different types of colors in bottles, to show, to create a little bit of colored light. The bottles are specially made. You'll see that with these bottles you get only a thin strip of colored light, but if you would make a bottle like that, it would open up. But we're still looking for someone that can produce bottles like that. They create the first dimmers. They have something like a black lantern, which is a lantern with a shutter. And one of the references to that is Guy Fawkes in the cellars of the Parliament had a black lantern, so we could close up all the light. But you see, they're experimenting with a lot of things. But these things don't really continue in history.
So when is this?
This is Renaissance, begin of Baroque. So they're experimenting with all this type of thing, but you don't see them really continuing in history. It's only way later that they really are. So they're used as effects, they're used to test stuff, but they're not really into the basic practice of theatre.
Before you proceed, I'm going to talk a little bit about the color here. Thank you, Klaus, also for the bottles. They were cheap, but were not the sufficient one that we wanted to do. Sorry for the light, you have to excuse a little bit. The color here, I'm cheating, because the red one, the green one, and the blue one is food color. You can buy it in every store. But this one is a little bit special. This is one of the colors they mentioned how to do it. Is it anyone who could guess what kind of coloring media we have used? I can give you a hint. You use it every Christmas. Saffron. So this is saffron. And it was a special price, just 10 crowns for saffron. And this is 15 grams of saffron. So, and if you want to see the results, please turn around. You see it on the wall. So it actually works. Even if I'm blinding most of the audience for the moment, but you can see the results there. Now I'm going to turn it off.
Okay. So the next step is the floating wicks. And floating wicks, one place where you find them is in churches. And it's this kind of things, the light that stays on in a church day and night, 24 hours a day, which was a very difficult thing to do, because a normal oil lamp you had to fill every 15 minutes, but they found a way to keep the wick short and level the oil. So they just make the wick float on the oil. And in English the word for footlights is floats. The funny thing is that nobody in England realizes anymore why it's called floats, because for them floats is just footlights. So we try to trace back this. We find some evidence, but very rare. And we found one description that we try to remake, which is basically you take cork and you put some little holes in it and a little bit of metal on top of it if you want to make it burn long, and you put wicks through them. This means if the oil level goes lower, your wick is going low, which means it continues to burn. So this was one of the ways of making something that could last longer than just one candle. If you look at, there is a lot of writing about the length of parts of an opera that are connected to the lengths of the candles. So they could only do one act and then they have to stop and replace all the candles and so on, and then they could continue. With these floats, we could just go on, because you could put a lot more burning material in front of it. But we can show some.
Yeah, and here's your time tracker, the 1 hour.
Yes.
Now we have just
Halfway.
40. We are halfway. So now we're going to show these type of floats, and it's two kinds. This is with raps oil. I'm not sure it's called raps in English, but someone who knows it better could translate it. But this is olive oil, and I think that's a good word for it. And
yeah, this is a modern version. It's just a little plastic cup that floats on it, but the principle stays the same. But we have one original one here in the middle that we could light also.
yes, and this one is with the cork. Should I say a little bit about the quality of the different type of oils?
Yeah.
Because that's also one type of findings we have. Because olive oil, that's a common oil that you use in the whole Mediterranean area. You know what I'm talking about. So it's very easy to find it there. Raps oil, well, you can find it in the south part of Europe also, but it's more common up here in Scandinavia. And you could see a little bit difference in the light quality here, or actually the color of the flame. And that was one thing that really interested us. Is it really a difference in the type of light it produces? We think that yes, you could see the difference, but more essential of the problem is the type of the wick they used. So this is a conventional, actually, candlelight wick that you can buy. The other one that Chris so famous cover now, that one.
Yeah.
It's nicely smoky.
That's another type of wick that's more for marschaller. I'm not sure what that is in English. Anyone? Well,
These outdoor candles.
outdoor.
These big wicks, and we
Yeah.
just take.
And we have taken parts of it. But actually, when you go back in the text, you'll find that they normally used some kind of grass, and that grass has a Latin name. But if you translate that, or actually it's famous it's called also lamp grass. So that was the grass they used as wick. And this is the one that's closest to one. And you could see that it's a little bit of smoke, black smoke coming out here. Well, now it's not, but behind here it's a lot. I think that was also a kind of problem they had when they had these oil lamps on stage because it was producing a lot of smoke.
So it must be very nice as an actor to be there in front of all these things. If you went too close, you burned your clothes. You got all the smoke into. On top of that, you were not very visible in the sense that there was no front light, which meant that you have to play a little bit into the back, and you only had a limited acting space. You needed 1 meter at least, because otherwise the light doesn't come to your face. And you couldn't go too deep because then there was no light left. So even if you had a huge set, you only had a limited space to work in. Good. And then the English, they drive on the other side of the road. But you also see a complete different evolution in the way they worked with lighting. They work a lot with a truss stage, which the audience is more sitting around. Chandeliers on stage and in the house. And they, in fact, they do kind of the first thing to focus light, in the sense that they use a candle to light each other. Actors will be playing with candles and light each other. So they are the operator, in fact, or the actor is kind of an operator of the lighting, in that sense.
And normally with when I have this type of presentation for my students, I use candles or maybe lighters to show this. I'm not have to blow it up, but to show that it's possible to use it. The problem with it is that you are blinding your audience, so you have to do like this, and then you could see the effect in the face. You could also do this type of presentation with two different lighters if that one both works, and then you could see how they affect the face in different ways.
So maybe we should also light the candle so you can see the complete.
Yes, it's time for that.
Yeah.
Good.
At the same time, oil lamps start to improve. And where you have a guy called Cardan, which is basically the guy that also invented this thing in your car, the Cardan axle. But he also, what he invented is basically, you have these little feeding things for birds, where you put water in, and the bird takes a little bit of water out, and the level, it always stays level. And it was the first way of having more oil in a container, and still have this limited height of a wick. And there is proof that they were made especially for the theatre. So that was already a way to make it a bit better. And the next step, of course, is the argand lamps, which give a lot more light. Instead of just one wick, you make kind of a cylinder of a wick with an airstream in the middle, which makes that you get way higher flames. A lot more oxygen means a nicer flame. But basically, nothing changed. The quality of the light got better, but we didn't change anything in the setup of our lighting. The setup of the lighting stayed more or less the same into the theatre. And then we go to an era where everything changes and which is very confusing. And that's, let's say, second industrial revolution, turn of the century, and you see at that point there is still oil lamps, but there is also gas light, there is limelight, there are petrol lamps, there is arc light, there is electrical light. Everything happens at the same time. A huge boost in the change of how we use technology into the arts. And you can see that quite well if you look at, there is some theater yearbooks from the States, which is basically an address book with all the theaters on the States, and it also notes the type of light they use. And you see some regions are still oil, some are petrol, some are electrical, but if you read the description it's probably only arc light, so they would probably combine oil lamps with arc or gas light with arc. Some have gas, some are completely electrical, and in some cases it just said, well, we have a lot of different types of electricity. You can just try. So what you see is that at that time everything happens at the same time, and that makes it very difficult to talk about this history, because during gaslight you still had oil light. During oil light you also used candles. So it's not like a nice synchronicity, but it all runs together, and it depends a lot on the region where you are working. So that makes it a little bit more complex.
And
Yeah.
if you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm the lighting manager during the time. And you could imagine how long time it did take to set the light for a performance, because you have to run around and put them on fire. Sorry.
So this is only candlelight now. And then I'll put off the screen for a second. So this is the lighting you would have with candle. So you see smoke, you see flickering, but on the other hand, it is kind of a natural light, because it's burning. It gives you kind of the full spectrum of light that you would have also in daylight. The color temperature is different, but the spectrum is kind of complete.
And I want to remind you that you're now adapting to less light than we normally use. So it's possible for you to see the actor on the stage, because today we are very, very unused to the low light, the low key of the light.
And then we get to gaslight. And gaslight is completely different. The amount of energy is huge. We're talking about flames this high, which also makes it possible to, and it's possible to put them upside down. So for the first time, we can light from the top of the stage, from the ceiling of the stage, we can light down, which makes that you can put the actors more into the back. On top of that, the light is strong enough to really make decent color. So we get control over color, we get control over intensity, because we can control the amount of lighting. And that's one of the elements we have been looking into, is the stage manager book of
Trollflöjten at the Royal Opera in Stockholm. And it's the Trollflöjten, the version 1854, and that's the interesting thing. That's the first opera they performed in gaslight. And fortunately, it was the same, during that time it was called decorateur, but we will today say scenographer, that did the last production before in candlelight, and also did the first one in gaslight. And what we're trying to find is the original sketches from both productions, to understand if they changed the way to paint the backdrop and the set. And it's very, very hard actually to find it, because everywhere we were looking, they refer to a set they have done, but we don't find the evidence of it. Literally, we could find it in the text, but not any picture from it. And coming further on, when we come to the next era, the electric era, we want to do the same in the change between gaslight and electric light at the Stockholm Opera, because it must be in the production there also.
We've been experimenting a little bit with gaslight at Per Edström's place, because he has a theater that is fully lit with gaslight. And you see directly that the flames are way higher, and it also meant there was a lot of fire risks. At one moment I found one story about a ballerina kind of doing something on her shoe, and her tutu got over a gas flame. The others came to help, which meant that all the other tutus got on fire, and they burned down the whole theater by running around. And I thought, well, this is kind of an exceptional story. But bit by bit, I started discovering all these stories. There is tens, even not hundreds of theaters that burned down in this way. Because the flames were so big, and people would burn their clothes, would run around the theater, and would burn down the whole theater. While if you compare that with...
That's a side effect of the stuff.
If you would compare that with candles, if a candle would fall over on stage, it probably just would go out, because the product is not burning by itself. So we also see that fires before were mostly when there was not a performance. And it's rare that it was with an audience, while with gaslight you see that there's a lot of fires going. So this risk was pretty high, so that's one of the reasons we got to electricity. But a step in between is limelight. Limelight is basically you take a limestone, you put a burner onto that and you make it white hot. And that's a major change in the way we make light, because then you have a point source. And with the point source you can focus light. All the light that we've seen till now goes a bit everywhere. I can't control the direction of a candle. I can make it stronger, and a flame always goes all directions. With this limes, you really could start using lenses and mirrors and stuff like that and work in a proper way. So that means that for the first time we really can take out one actor into a beam, which changes the way we work with lighting. In the beginning as an effect, it's only later on that we start to use that as a standard thing. The same thing happens, I'm going to go a bit quick to that, with the arc light, which is basically like you're welding. You kind of create a strip of sparks in between the two poles, which was even stronger and which made it possible also, for example, to create a rainbow effect or a sunrise or stuff like that. So it's really bit by bit we get grip onto.
We can just mention that until the late 70s in Stockholm we had cinema projectors, biografprojektorer, that used actually the arc light as the light source for projecting film.
It also makes it possible to create new effects, and a typical one is Pepper's Ghost, is the way you project a ghost on stage. But you see, it doesn't last long in history. It disappears. It's nice an effect, and at one moment everybody has seen it and it's completely gone. But it comes back in the year 2000 more or less, in what we now call holographic projection, which is basically just the same thing as they used with the Pepper. The reason for that was the technology wasn't ready. In the sense they couldn't make screens that were big enough that they became invisible. So the actors were very limited in the place where they could work, and then it stops as an effect. While now it's used for 3D sets and whatever. So you see in a lot of cases that people go back into history, find an old effect, update it to modern technology, and reuse it. And then the next big step, as Anders said, is we go from the gas light, we go to electrical light. The funny thing is, and that's what you see with a lot of technology, the first thing we do is we just replace the original equipment with new equipment. So the light bulbs were on exactly the same spots as where the gas lights were. And the gas lights were mainly in the same spot as where the candles were. It's only later on that we start thinking like, oh, we can do something else. We tested some lighting, but I think we have to put out the candles now.
Well, yeah, we could.
Was it because it's connected?
I know, I know. Okay. It's very safe electric-wise.
Yes. This is the original way that it was connected in the City Theatre of Kortrijk in 1912. And in the same catalogue, it mentions the opera in Stockholm with an identical installation.
And you could count the light bulbs because it's a picture taken from backstage towards the audience.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to exactly count how many lamps they used.
What is quite interesting is that we would think it would be red, green, blue. But in reality it's red, blue, white. And we've been discussing this with somebody that is an expert in 1900 sets in the States. And she said, well, one of the reasons is that if you have a painted set, you only need to enhance colors. You don't need to create color. We use this RGB to create a white backdrop, and then we change it in all kinds of different colors. But in this case, it was just to enhance colors into the painted set.
I think you have to put it on light because it's a little bit heavier.
Yes.
And just so you know, you have 15 minutes.
Yes. We see that on the thank you very much. That's very good. Here you could see the type of light lamp bulbs we have used. And this is going to be an issue for the future because they're going to ban this type of lamps from 2021. So it will be complicated to reproduce this type of experiment. And this was from the original, you could see up on the top picture, it was white lamp bulbs, and you bought special color.
Yes.
They're called dip color or
it's lamp dip, they call it. And it becomes very difficult to find because if you don't find the lights, it doesn't make sense to have the paint anymore. So that makes it. By the way, the lamps we use, because we try to do everything on a scale 1 to 4. So for the ones that have seen our previous presentation about the mechanics, we want to build this at the end into the scale 1 to 40 also. So we can show all the different lighting.
And you see our actor on the stage is 1 to 4. It's a giant that we actually get to this performance. And I just want to say that we really appreciate this costume from the 1700. Do you like it?
Very nice.
Very nice. It's new produced. It's by Gardiner, curtains from IKEA. And it's Nils and Eva who's done it.
Okay, now we make a little bit of a side track and we go to Bram Stoker. And you all know Bram Stoker from Dracula. But in fact, that was only his hobby. His main job, he was the financial manager of Henry Irving in London. And Henry Irving is one of the renewers of the theater, the technology and stuff like that. And Stoker wrote a lot about these changeovers. And one of the nice things it says is, well, it's kind of an issue with this electrical light because if you dim it, it changes color. Now for people that are a little bit aware about the discussion with LED, where we say the problem with LED is that if you dim it, it doesn't change color because we're used to that. And in a lot of cases in these changeovers between different technologies, you will see that people want to keep what they have because it's part of their language, and at one moment they feel they lose their language. So I think in that sense and another thing is that, oh, the light is way too white. That's what you see with LED also, is we all feel that, oh, it's way too white. But one of the important elements is because of a better control, light is one thing, but darkness becomes part of our designs. Before there was never completely dark because you could dim gas lights, for example, but you couldn't turn them off because then you had to relight them. With electrical light you can dim to a blackout, so a blackout really becomes part of lighting design.
Now, Chris, we have to, yes.
Yes, and I can't skip this one because Stoker also explains why all the technicians are in black. Because they said, well, now you can do changeovers without closing the curtains, so they provided them with silent shoes and with dark clothing. Okay.
Chris, now we have to have a jump.
Yes.
Because we're
Shall
short of
I
time.
go very quickly over
Just
this?
say it very quickly.
Because we found a second nest, which is API, working in Hellerau, which is a part of the city of Dresden. And at the same time you have a guy, Fortuny, who invents so you have API. He says, okay, walls and behind the walls light bulbs, and I can make a complete shadowless light and work with that. This is a reconstruction they did a couple of years ago there. You get Linnebach that tries to figure out how to project abstract images on a backdrop. And you get Fortuny that creates kind of a quarter of a bowl which becomes kind of an endless horizon. And he works with indirect lighting to get abstract images on that. The three of them supported by Siemens and AEG. And you see something completely new happening, a completely new type of lighting design, which is rather familiar to us. But the funny thing is that if you look at the big designs they all made, they're all traditional painted sets. So they experimented with it, but it's only way later in the history that we get to that.
And the next part is that we've actually got the first real spotlights with lenses that you could direct in some directions, and you could actually choose what on the stage that should be lit. And the next guy that is of importance is Stanley McCandless, a person in the beginning of 1930. I would say he was the first lighting designer because he started to think about light from different directions, and then he had something he called the method, and the method was how to arrange the spotlight for different areas on the stage and also different directions. And we can't go into detail, but you could see the idea here. You have different directions coming into the face, coming into the backlight and side lights and so on.
Another very quick fact is that, sorry, I'm sorry, is that a one moment strand lighting is working on the crossfade, the type of light board we know now, but at the same time Bentham, that is also working in this company, is working on this type of light board. Why? Because next door there is an organ factory. And it has been a discussion for years in this company, and finally we went to crossfade, and that's the reason why we are technicians. Because we work with very technical stuff. If Bentham had won this war between these two systems, and this would be the light board, probably we would not talk about technicians, but we would talk about artists.
So now we are reaching the next stepping point and the next part of the crossover, because we go to, in the future, have the stage lit by LED. And LED are fantastic, that boring sometimes, most of the time. And I could prove it by using my famous little equipment from Claes Olsson, but you can't see the full effect unless I take all the candlelights out, and we have a little bit short of time, so I'm going to just put it on. This is white. You could put it in red, you could put it in green, you could put it in blue, and some different variations of that. And if you skip a part of your lunch, you could see it with just the LED. Otherwise, you could take my word for the effect of this one. And now the candle is soon.
Yeah. I want to say one more thing about the LEDs, because I talked about APIA, like lights everywhere, complete shadowless light, which was not possible with spotlights. But if we would go on with LED, it would be possible again to make the set becoming the lighting instrument. So maybe if we go a step further than what we're doing now, which is copying old equipment with new technology, and we go a step further and we look back into the history what would be possible, maybe we will start to like LED.
But the quality goes better and better and better. This is the really cheap one. Well, it's both cheap and it's, you would say that the quality is not so good because they have done it in a very easy way. Now we have exactly 5 minutes for questions. So, we just take up the house light. Yes. So, it was very, very quick. Maybe you have some questions, or maybe you're too hungry to have a question. And we could also, we will stay here some minutes after, so you could have more individual questions.
I have
Yes.
a very technical one. I'm sorry, it's a bit boring maybe. Thank you so very much. Super interesting presentation. Do you know if they were interested in fading? Like, because I once made a performance where I faded out a candle, and it was a quite complex process to figure out how to do it, but it was so much fun, and I've always wondered, did they do that?
Yes.
Yes, they did that.
But Drottningholm Theatre,
Yeah.
you can lower the float, the front, the ramp in the front, down in the basement, and that's a scary one. But the side stands, you could turn them out. That one way, but that's fading down, not fading out.
And you have Sabatini,
Sabatini
with the cylinders that go over the candle.
That covers.
But the thing is, if we talk about fading now, we're talking about the process in between full and out. While for them, the process was only you had light and they wanted to get it out. It's not like they would dim at 50% or something like that. In that sense, it's fading intensity became part of our language. The way, while with candles, it's more like a way to get to less light. So in that sense, I think there is a difference, but there are possibilities.
So it's not impossible, but it's complicated. Some more questions? Part of it.
Yeah.
Part of it, yes. So.
It's in the final event, because my
What?
question takes a long time. So
Oh, okay. I think Chris will stay for the round table.
yeah,
I can't do it, unfortunately. So,
I see.
yeah, we have one.
I do have a question about the LED
Yes.
transition that we are on the verge of. And can you tell me a little bit about how theaters are preparing for that
Yeah.
right now, both
The-
artistically and technically?
In Europe, they need to, because they're going to ban most
Yeah.
of the halogen lamp. Actually, I've been in a group that tried to save the incandescent lamp, and we succeeded a little bit. So some of the lamps will still be there for some years more. But for example, the Stockholm Opera, Royal Opera, they did a big changeover 3-4 years ago, where they bought totally new equipment. The problem is that what you're doing, you're taking the old spotlight, throwing them out, and buying new that will rest for 10. It's like buying a car. It's expensive, it's high technology, and it will go out of fashion very quick. So, I can't use that old car. It's too old. Take it away. And now we have a 4-wheel car. Same with the spotlight. So, the cost for every theater, and now I'm talking about the big theater, might not be so big problem, but for the small theater, it will be enormous expensive to have the fancy equipment. Maybe they could use a lot of the cheaper one, but then we have the result of using cheap LEDs, and you can compare it with going from high fidelity stereo sound, going down to MP3 files instead. And no one, well, it sounds good. Well, if you compare it, if you have known what we have had.
In fact, that was one of the big discussions we've had with the European Commission. That said, look, we did a lot of acceptability tests, which basically means they show two different types of lights, and they show them to a general audience, and they're happy with it. The problem is that if you use an LED in your living room, you have a lot of other light sources, so the spectrum doesn't matter so much. It's not so critical into control and stuff like that. While we sometimes use only one spotlight in a very controlled environment. And the funny thing is that we figured out that even the LEDs that were available didn't match the standards they had set. So we would, yes, I think I should put it out, yes.
No, the time is out.
Okay, so it's a very complex thing, and we will get there, but it's too soon to really do a full changeover into the theaters, it's my opinion.
It's 12:15. Thank you very much.